They left me behind. 13 years old alone in a house full of memories that no longer mattered. A note on the fridge, a suitcase packed, a family gone just like that. My parents left for Florida and didn't even look back. It took me days to understand that they weren't coming back. But then my uncle, the rich one, Gideon Hale, found me. He didn't ask questions, he just took me in. 15 years later, he's dead. The will reading. My mother shows up expecting millions, her eyes already calculating. She looks at me, the forgotten child, and I shut her up. The lawyer. His face says it all, horror. I can't wait for her to finally realize she's been shut out. Her greed has no place here anymore. Before I share my story, I'd love to know you are here with me. Just say hi in the comments or tell me where you're from. I love hearing how far my story can reach. Thank you. And now, let me tell you everything. I stood in the kitchen staring at the refrigerator, the heat of the summer morning making the room feel suffocating. The buzzing of the fan overhead was barely enough to push the stale air around. My hands were cold as I reached for the note stuck to the fridge with the same magnetic clip that always held grocery lists, reminders, and receipts. This note was different, though. It was hastily scribbled, the handwriting unmistakably my mother's. It read, "Stay with a friend for a few days. Love you." No signature, no explanation, no apology. Nothing. It took a while for the words to sink in, for the weight of them to settle in my chest. The front door was open, their luggage was gone. There was no goodbye, no see you soon. My parents had just vanished, not physically but emotionally, long before that moment. I felt it then in the hollow space that echoed around me, that I had been abandoned. I didn't cry. Instead, I did what I always did when things got too heavy. I pretended it wasn't happening. I stuffed my feelings deep inside and tried to keep breathing. But the scent of flour and stale cereal in the pantry became unbearable. The soft, broken hum of the fan didn't offer any comfort. The photo of our family on the counter caught my eye. It was the same one that had been there for years, the one where we were all smiling at Disney World. I hadn't even noticed the corner was torn until now. It was as if that photo, once so full of warmth, was now a reminder of the fracture I had been blind to for so long. I should have seen it, the way things were unraveling. Maybe I was just too scared to look. Days passed and I waited. I didn't eat much, mostly the things I could find in the pantry, cans of soup and crackers. I waited for them to come back. Every time I picked up the phone to call, I hesitated. The calls went unanswered. I checked my phone for texts, but there were none. Then I decided to check social media. I scrolled through my mom's account. There they were, my mom and my two sisters, laughing, standing in front of a palm tree in Florida. Their smiles looked real, but there was something hollow about it. Not a single mention of me. No, we miss you. Not even a wish you were here. I felt a pang in my chest. I had been replaced. In their eyes, I no longer mattered. But then something unexpected happened. A message popped up on my phone, an unknown number, a text. "You okay?" I stared at it for a long time before typing back, "Yeah, I'm fine." But the reply never came. I couldn't help but wonder. Who was that? Had someone noticed? Were they watching me from a distance, just like I had watched everything else in my life slip away? The sound of the Lincoln's engine was a stark contrast to the quiet of the street. I hadn't expected to hear anything other than the occasional car passing, but when the black sedan rolled to a stop in front of me, I froze. The tinted windows slid down, revealing a man I didn't recognize but whose face seemed oddly familiar. Orion. His voice was firm, measured. "You're not walking anywhere tonight." It took me a second to process who it was. The name clicked, but the memories were hazy. Gideon Hale. My rich uncle, the one who had dropped out of our lives long before I could even remember. He had always been distant, a shadow in the background of our family. I'd heard the stories, the whispers about how he had cut himself off from the rest of the family, but the details were vague, clouded by years of bitterness. He wasn't the type of uncle I would have ever imagined coming to rescue me. But there he was, pulling up in his car, offering me an escape I didn't think I deserved. "Get in. You're not staying here." He didn't wait for an answer. Didn't have much of a choice. A part of me screamed to get back inside, to wait for my parents to come back and explain why they'd left me behind, but another part of me, the part that was exhausted from pretending everything was okay, urged me to follow. As I sat in the car, the cold leather seats felt foreign, uncomfortable. I gripped my backpack tightly in my lap, a small, ridiculous shield against the overwhelming sense of displacement. The world outside the window seemed distant, like it didn't belong to me. My mind raced with questions I didn't have answers to. Why was he here now? What did he want from me? What had I done to deserve this? Or was it just a cruel twist of fate? Gideon didn't say anything as we drove through the streets of Savannah, the sun slowly setting behind us. I glanced out the window one last time, my childhood home fading into the background, and I couldn't help but wonder if I was leaving behind everything I had ever known or everything I had ever wanted to forget. We finally arrived at his house in Greenwich. It was nothing like the modest, broken-down house I'd grown up in. This was the kind of house I had only seen in magazines. Massive columns, sprawling lawns, and a sleek, modern interior that felt cold and unwelcoming. He led me through the house, showing me to my room. Everything about it felt sterile, untouched, as if I was just another piece in his well-ordered life. But then he handed me something I wasn't expecting, a leather-bound journal, my name embossed in gold on the cover. "You'll need this," he said, his voice surprisingly soft. "Things exist to be used, not feared." I didn't fully understand the words, but something in them settled in my chest. He had been distant, always keeping his emotions at arm's length, but there was something different now. The coldness I had expected wasn't there. He didn't treat me like a charity case, but rather like a task, something he had to fix, even though I didn't think I needed fixing. That night I tried to sleep, but the words of my mother's note, the images of her laughing with my sisters on the beach, kept playing over and over in my mind. The room was quiet, almost too quiet, and as I lay there staring at the ceiling, I realized that no matter how far I ran, no matter where I went, I couldn't escape the past. The next morning I opened the journal. I didn't know what to write, but something inside me urged me to begin. I wrote, "If something is inside this house, it belongs to everyone who lives within it." It felt like a promise, a declaration to myself that I wouldn't just be a guest in my own life. Not anymore. I laid the journal down and glanced at the clock. Time was moving, but I wasn't sure if I was ready for what came next. Gideon had taken me in, but there were still too many unanswered questions. As much as he had given me a place to stay, the emptiness of the past still loomed large. I didn't know yet if I could fill it with something real or if I was just trapped in a new cage. But for now I'd play along. I would listen to his rules, write my thoughts, and see where this strange new chapter took me. I was just starting to realize that maybe, just maybe, I didn't need to be afraid of what came next. After all, I had made it this far. And now it was time to figure out why Gideon had come back into my life and what exactly he wanted me to learn. The school year had begun, and with it a shift I hadn't anticipated. There was something electric about being around people, a collective energy that both unsettled and fueled me. My first real experience in a public school had been jarring, but I quickly found my place in the debate club, and it became my anchor. Every Tuesday and Thursday after school, I would sit in the small windowless room watching older kids argue their points with confidence. I was intimidated at first, unsure of how to make my voice heard without stumbling over my words, but slowly something began to change inside me. The more I practiced, the more comfortable I became with the idea of speaking up. It wasn't long before I found myself standing at the front of the room, arguing my position in a debate about environmental policies. My voice, although shaky at first, grew firmer as I found the rhythm of my argument. I was awarded first place in my first debate competition, a small win, but a win nonetheless. And even though Gideon didn't attend, I knew he was proud. His quiet approval was all I needed. That night I went home and opened my journal, the one he had given me. Started to write, scribbling the techniques I'd learned about speaking and listening, about how to argue effectively. I knew Gideon's lessons were meant to be more than just about winning debates. They were about finding my own voice in a world that seemed determined to silence me. I jotted down one of his many sayings: half the world bluffs. The other half apologizes for existing. Do neither. The words rang in my head, and I closed the journal with a sense of purpose I hadn't known before. It wasn't long before I found myself working part-time at a local grocery store, a job I was both grateful for and wary of. I had no idea how to bag groceries, and my coworkers often chuckled at my awkwardness. But the feeling of earning my own money, of having something that was mine, was a sense of independence I hadn't known I needed. Gideon was the one who drove me to the bank to open my first account, teaching me about budgeting and saving. The rule was simple: save half, spend half. Save. It felt like a lesson I would carry with me for the rest of my life. One night, as I was counting tips, I noticed something strange. One of my coworkers had taken extra money from the tip jar. I confronted him, and instead of getting angry, I simply took a picture of the empty jar and showed it to the manager. He was fired the next day. Gideon's rule of fairness was simple. Life wasn't about making exceptions for the people you loved, but about holding yourself and others accountable. He taught me that mistakes were inevitable, but how you responded to them, that was what mattered. I didn't make a scene, I didn't shout or accuse. I just handled it. And in that, I began to understand what Gideon had been preparing me for. The real world didn't care about your feelings. It cared about what you did when faced with adversity. I wasn't expecting much in the way of romance, but then I met Evan Mercer. He was soft-spoken, thoughtful, and unlike anyone I had ever met before. We volunteered together at a community garden one Saturday afternoon, and from there we slowly began spending more time together. He wasn't like the others who asked invasive questions about my past. He didn't push. At first I resisted the idea of getting close to him. My history with trust was complicated. But Evan was patient. Over time I started to believe that maybe, just maybe, I could allow myself to care about someone again. One evening, as we sat in my dorm room, he asked me about my family. I hesitated. I had never really opened up about my past, about the way my parents had disappeared, about the way I had been discarded. But something in Evan's eyes told me it was safe to share. "I'm not like them," he said gently. "You're not like them either." But even as the words left his mouth, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was still trapped in the shadow of my family's decisions. My parents, the ones who had abandoned me, still held a power over me that I couldn't escape. It was in that moment that Evan found something he hadn't expected: a picture. A picture of me with Gideon, one I hadn't even remembered was taken. He stared at it for a long time, the room growing heavy with an unspoken tension. "Who's this?" he asked, his voice careful. "That's my uncle." I said the words, feeling cold in my mouth. He didn't say anything for a moment, but his expression had changed. It was subtle, but it was there. He had seen something in that picture that made him retreat. And for the first time in months, I felt the sting of being seen. Not just by him, but by myself. The walls I had spent years building around my heart were starting to crack, and I didn't know how to stop it. The next few days were a blur. I had returned to Gideon's house in Greenwich for the weekend, and as usual, he kept me busy with tasks and lessons. But it was when I was cleaning out his office that I found something that made my heart stop: a contract yellowed with age wedged between two folders. It was a business agreement between Gideon and my father's company, Carver Industries. The deal had gone south, ending in what looked like a legal battle over a failed transaction. I couldn't help but ask him about it, though I already knew the answer. Gideon looked at me, his face unreadable, before turning back to his desk. "Some promises are expensive," he muttered. It was then that I began to understand there was more to this story than I had been told, more than the simple narrative of abandonment. My family wasn't just flawed, they had made decisions that affected not only me, but also the people who had tried to help me. That night I received a call. It wasn't from my parents or even from Evan. The voice on the other end was unfamiliar but calm. It was a woman's voice, and she spoke with a familiarity that made me uneasy. "Are you Orion Beckett?" she asked. I stiffened. "Yes. I'm not sure if you know who I am, but I'm a relative of your mother's, Meredith Carver. I need to speak to you about something important, something your uncle never told you." Her words hung in the air like a threat. "They call him a pragmatist. He saved you from your parents, but he didn't save you from everything. They used you, all of you, as leverage." I didn't know what to make of her words, but I knew one thing: there was a story here. one that I had never been told, and it was a story that I needed to uncover. Later that night, as I opened the journal Gideon had given me, I flipped through its pages. I'd written down every lesson, every nugget of wisdom he'd shared with me, but I hadn't expected to find what I did. Tucked inside the back cover was a photocopied email, one that seemed to be from my mother to my father. It was a conversation I wasn't meant to see, and it was about me. The words were blurry, but I could make out enough. If we don't follow through, we'll lose everything. The boy is the key, my mother had written. I swallowed hard, my heart pounding in my chest. It wasn't just that they had abandoned me, they had used me as a pawn in their own twisted game. I closed the journal with a snap and wrote, my hand shaking. I won't stay quiet anymore. I wasn't going to be their secret anymore. I would find out the truth, and I would make sure they could never erase me again. The changes in Evan were subtle, but they were there. I noticed how he became distant after the photo incident. The way he avoided eye contact, the coldness in his voice when he spoke to me. I had tried to ignore it, to brush it off, but something inside me started to stir. I thought maybe it was just me. Maybe I was overthinking it. But when I confronted him, the truth came out. "I met your mom," he said, his voice low. "She came to find you. At school." I froze. "She said you were being taken advantage of. That your uncle was using you to get back at the family." The words stung. I didn't know if I was hurt because Evan believed her, or because my mother had stooped so low as to poison someone else against me. "I don't believe her," Evan said quietly. "But it's hard not to wonder what's really going on." I didn't respond. The distance between us grew wider with each passing second. But the truth was, I was more afraid than ever. Afraid of being abandoned again, this time by the one person who had seemed to care. The next day I went to visit Gideon. His office was quiet, the only sound the rustling of papers. As I sat down at his desk, one of the files slipped out of place, revealing a contract, a deal between Gideon and Carver Industries. My father's signature was on it. It was a deal that had gone wrong. A deal that had torn families apart. "Protect the boy at all cost," the note said, written in Gideon's familiar hand. I looked at him confused. What is this about? Gideon's expression softened. "Sometimes the cost of doing the right thing is higher than you can imagine." His words didn't help. The anger and confusion inside me started to grow. I needed answers, and I wasn't going to stop until I had them. I left his office that day unsure of what to believe anymore. I had been protected, yes, but by a man who was keeping secrets from me. Gideon was not the savior I had hoped for. He had been just as wrapped up in the family drama as anyone else. But now I had something to hold on to. I would find out the truth, even if it meant tearing apart the pieces of my past. The chapter ended with a sharp resolve, a sense that everything was about to come to a head. The call, the secrets, the journal, they were all pieces of the puzzle. But I didn't know yet if I could handle the full picture. Chapter 5. The intensifying conflict. The dark side of the Carver family and Gideon's health deteriorates. The call came late in the evening, just as I was finishing up an assignment. My heart dropped when I heard the voice on the other end of the line. "Orion." My mother's voice rang through the phone, sharp and calculated. "We need to talk." I could feel the coldness in her tone, even though she wasn't physically there. My body tensed, but I held my breath and listened. "I'm not asking for much," she continued. "Just for you to speak in our favor in the investigation. They're looking into the Carver finances, and your testimony could help a great deal. It would be in your best interest to comply." Her words felt like a punch to the gut, but I remained calm. This was typical of her, always seeing things as a transaction, as a way to manipulate me back into the family fold. She hinted at something far darker, too. "If you help us, you'll be part of the family again, Orion." I'm not asking for much. It wasn't an offer. It was a demand. The thought of bargaining with my own identity made my stomach churn. I was just a pawn in their game, a tool to be used for their gain. The sickening realization was that all along I had never really been part of the Carver family. I was just a means to an end, a forgotten piece they would try to reinsert into their puzzle whenever it suited them. But this time I would refuse to be the person they wanted me to be. I had my own path now, one I was determined to follow. Meredith Carver's appearance in my life was as unexpected as it was unnerving. She found me in a small cafe near the university one rainy afternoon. As I entered the place, I spotted her sitting at a corner table, her eyes scanning the crowd until they landed on me. Her expression was calculating but familiar. She looked like my mother, yet somehow colder. "Orion," she greeted me in a voice that was too smooth, too rehearsed. "Meredith Carver, your mother's cousin. We need to talk." I sat down cautiously. There was something about her that made the air feel dense, like I was being pulled into a web. She leaned in, her voice lowering. "There's a lot you don't know about your family, Orion. Carver Industries has had its fair share of skeletons in the closet, and the way your parents treated you, that was all part of their plan. They used you. They used your name, your identity, for their own benefit." The words hit me harder than I expected. I had never truly understood why my parents left me, but now, hearing it from Meredith, the pieces started to fall into place. "They didn't just abandon you," she said almost sympathetically. "They left you behind to cover their own tracks. It's easier to walk away from the mess if they don't have to explain themselves to you." She slid an old email across the table. It was a message from my mother, buried among a stack of documents she had kept hidden from me. The content was jumbled, but I could make out enough. It was a conversation about how my parents had used my name to open financial accounts for the family. Accounts that were meant to hide the truth. My blood ran cold as the realization settled over me. I wasn't just a victim of abandonment. I was part of their scheme, a piece of their well-oiled machine they had discarded when I no longer fit their narrative. I felt a strange sense of vindication mixed with overwhelming disgust. The family I had longed to reconnect with had never cared for me. They saw me as a tool, a part of their plans, and the moment I stopped being useful, they left me behind without a second thought. The following weeks blurred together as I juggled schoolwork, my job, and Gideon's increasingly erratic health. It started with small signs, his hands shaking when he held a glass of water, his shortness of breath when we climbed the stairs to his study. I had known something wasn't right, but it wasn't until I saw him forget the gardener's name, someone he had known for 15 years, that I realized how serious things had become. I tried to confront him about it, but he just waved me off, claiming it was the stress of work. "I'm just a little overwhelmed," he said with a forced smile, as if that could explain everything. But I could see the cracks in the facade. I had seen the way he moved slower each day, the way he avoided looking at me directly, as if afraid I would ask too many questions. It wasn't just his health that worried me. The more I stayed in his house, the more I began to feel like I was just another thing to be taken care of. Gideon's life, his home, his rules, it all felt so perfect on the surface. But the more I looked, the more I realized how much was hidden beneath the polished exterior. One day, while organizing some files in his office, I found a folder titled "Succession Plan" with my name on it. It was marked in red, a clear indication that this wasn't meant for my eyes. The realization hit me hard. Why was I included in these documents? What did he really plan for me? The more I thought about it, the more I realized there was something he wasn't telling me. That night, as I sat in my dorm room, the phone rang. The voice on the other end was unfamiliar, a man's voice deep and commanding. "I'm calling on behalf of Carver Industries," the man said. "We need you to stop digging into the past. It's not good for anyone involved. And for what it's worth, Gideon tried to protect you. But that may not last much longer." My stomach twisted in knots as I heard those words. Gideon tried to protect me. I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. The weight of the statement lingered in the air. Who was this man? And why was he telling me this now? What was he trying to warn me about? But there was no answer. He hung up before I could respond. My thoughts raced as I stood there, my heart pounding in my chest. What did this mean for me, for Gideon? I called Gideon immediately, but there was no answer. Panic set in as I dialed his number over and over again. Just as I was about to give up, my phone buzzed. It was Evan. "I've got bad news." Evan's voice crackled over the line. "Gideon's been taken to the hospital. He's in critical condition. My heart sank. The world I had been slowly building, the life I had been starting to trust, suddenly felt like it was slipping away. By the time I arrived at New York Presbyterian Hospital, Gideon had already been moved to the ICU. I rushed through the sterile white halls, my breath quickening as I tried to find my way to his room. When I finally saw him, the sight of him lying in that bed, pale and weak, took my breath away. He looked so small, so fragile, like the strong man I had always known was slowly fading away. He tried to sit up when he saw me, but his body betrayed him. He coughed, and I rushed to his side, gripping his hand tightly. "Stand tall, Orion," he whispered hoarsely, his eyes filled with a strange intensity. "Even when they push you down, stand tall." I nodded, though my mind was reeling. What had happened to him? Why was he telling me this now when he was so clearly at his weakest? "We don't have much time," he said softly. "There's something you need to be prepared for. Something I should have told you long ago." Hours later, I sat in the office of Mr. Halpern, Gideon's longtime lawyer. The air was thick with anticipation. Halpern had already warned me that Gideon had changed his will 6 months ago, and I wasn't sure what to expect. The lawyer handed me the will, but his expression told me everything I needed to know. "I've never seen Gideon like this," he said quietly. "He was different." This will was made with the full knowledge that things were about to get complicated. As I scanned the document, my eyes landed on a section that mentioned the Carver family, specifically my parents. The tone of the will was colder than anything I had ever seen. "They will not have a say in your future," it stated clearly. Mr. Halpern leaned in. "Orion, I need you to understand. They're going to come for you. Your family won't let this go." The weight of those words sank deep into my chest. There was no going back. The family I had hoped to return to, the family that had abandoned me, was coming back into my life. And this time I wasn't going to let them take me down without a fight. The day Gideon was transferred to the special care unit, I received a message from Halpern. The reading of the will was going to take place as soon as possible, but I had to be ready. The battle for my future, for my place in the Carver family, was about to begin. I took a deep breath and looked at my phone, the words from Halpern still echoing in my head. I was ready for whatever came next, and I wasn't going to back down. The room was heavy with tension as we sat around the dark wooden table in Mr. Halpern's office. My family, my mother, father, and sisters, were seated across from me. The only sound was the occasional rustle of papers as Halpern prepared to read the will of Gideon Hale. I could feel the weight of their eyes on me, the silent judgment, the anticipation of what this reading would reveal. I too was waiting for answers, but I had learned by now to brace myself for the unexpected. Halpern cleared his throat and began reading. The first part of the will was straightforward enough. The estate was left to me, Orion Beckett. To my nephew Gideon's will read, whom I chose to protect after being abandoned by his own family. I felt a strange mixture of vindication and relief wash over me. This wasn't just a will. It was an acknowledgement of my worth, the value I had never been given by the Carver family. The second part of the will outlined a sizable sum to be donated to educational charities, a cause Gideon had always championed. And then the words that made my heart race: to the Carver family, those who abandoned my nephew, I leave nothing. No property, no wealth, no claim. The room went deathly still. My mother's face, once full of smug certainty, drained of color. My father shifted uncomfortably in his seat, and my sisters exchanged glances, their faces twisted in confusion and disbelief. Halpern continued his voice even as he read the final part of the will, but I barely heard him. My mind was focused on the stunned silence in the room. I had never seen my family so defeated. They were the ones who had walked away from me, who had left me behind without a second thought. Now here they were, receiving nothing from the man who had taken me in. "You cannot do this." My mother finally erupted, her voice high and strained. She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping harshly against the floor. "You cannot just throw us out like this. We're family." I stood my ground, meeting her gaze with newfound strength. "You're not my family. You left me. And now Gideon has decided who he considers family. Her face contorted with fury, and she turned to Halpern as though somehow hoping he could change the decision. "This is insane," she insisted, her voice rising. "He doesn't even belong here. He's not even a Carver." But it wasn't Halpern who responded. It was me. "You don't get to decide what's fair anymore," I said, my voice steady, even as my heart beat faster. "Gideon chose me. That's all that matters now." In the heat of the argument, Halpern pulled out something else. A photograph, an old picture of my mother, father, and siblings sitting next to Gideon at a family gathering. The image was old, tattered, and clearly taken long before I was abandoned. The relationship between them, once hidden beneath layers of silence and neglect, was now exposed. My mother's expression soured as the photo was placed in front of her. "This could be used as evidence," Halpern said quietly. "It shows that your family was more involved with Gideon than you've let on, and it could be important should there be any future disputes over the estate." My mother's gaze flickered to the photo, and for the first time I saw a crack in her facade. Her jaw tightened, but she said nothing. I felt a strange sense of satisfaction mixed with disgust. These were the people who had left me behind, and now they were the ones being left in the dust. The tension continued to rise as the reading of the will went on. My mother's protests became more desperate, her words losing their force as Halpern calmly explained that Gideon had made his decisions clear. He had seen through the family's facade, and now so had I. The silence between us was suffocating. I had nothing left to say to them. When my mother continued to argue, claiming that I was not the rightful heir, I finally lost my patience. "You don't get to talk about what's fair anymore. You abandoned me. I don't owe you anything." The room grew even quieter, and it wasn't long before another unexpected event took place. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I quickly checked the message. It was from a lawyer I hadn't recognized, one who claimed to represent the Carver family in an unrelated matter. Halpern's voice broke through my thoughts as he continued the legal jargon, but I barely heard him. My mind was reeling from the message. It wasn't just a simple legal notification. It was a warning. The message, short and to the point, told me my family was involved in something much darker than I had realized: financial fraud. I looked at my parents, the ones who had abandoned me, and I could feel my blood run cold. Not only had they left me, but they had used my identity to further their own gain. The weight of their deception pressed down on me, and for the first time I understood the full extent of the betrayal. As my mother's protests continued to echo in the room, I turned to Halpern, my voice cold and firm. "Thank you for showing me the truth," I said, my words cutting through the tension. "I'm done with them." After the will reading, the next few days felt like a blur. The chaos of the legal battle was inevitable, but there was something else that needed my attention: Gideon. His health continued to deteriorate, and I found myself spending more time at his side trying to make sense of everything that had happened. One morning I sat alone in his study, the stillness of the room filling the space around me. I stared out of the window, lost in thought, reflecting on the will reading and everything that had transpired. I had expected anger, I had expected vengeance, but I didn't expect the peace that had settled over me. Gideon had taught me so much, but it wasn't just the lessons about money or business or success. It was the lesson about standing tall in the face of everything that had happened to me. I had never asked to be a part of this family, but Gideon had chosen me, and that choice had made me stronger than I could have ever imagined. I wasn't the leftover, I whispered to myself, the words feeling final, like the closing of a chapter. I was the one he chose, and I will not be erased. Later that afternoon, I met Evan at my dorm. The conversation was long overdue. When he walked in, I saw the same concern in his eyes that had been there from the start. "I've been waiting for you to tell me everything," Evan said, his voice steady but gentle. "About your family, about everything. It's all been a secret, and I don't want you to feel like you have to hide from me anymore." I took a deep breath. It's not just about the family. It's about me. I've spent so much of my life being someone I wasn't, someone they wanted me to be. But not anymore. I'm finally starting to figure out who I am. Evan nodded, his face softening as he listened. I've never been more proud of you." I smiled, feeling the weight of the past lifting off my shoulders. But there was still one thing left: my family. I couldn't undo what they had done, but I could choose to walk away from it.